Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be the ultimate.
Oh, hey, welcome back, everybody. Another week goes by here. This is Rick Wagner getting with you on Getting It Right on KNZZ KGLN. Well, we're at 1100 and 92.7 and 980 and 101.3. And, of course, on the interstate. Well, it might be on the interstate. Internet. And we're just all over the place. And you can get our podcast, too. You can get in the podcast by going to your whatever you use for a podcast and look for The Rick Wagner Show. It should be popping up there. And it's mainly just what we've done on the show that we've tried to condense and put out there for people to miss it. I've tried to get more original stuff up there, but time has been a problem. But I really want to because I enjoy it. Really, I enjoy talking to you folks really about as much as anything I do. So I wish I could spend more time doing it. I'm gonna try. Well, the week seems to be going much better than it was not that long ago. It's a time when I think we might have a shot at surviving another 20 or 30 years. I mean, we have some of the right people lined up, but we got some of the wrong people lined up on the other side. We just have to make sure that we keep pushing in the right direction. Some of you probably were watching the not the inauguration, but that's on Monday, watching the Senate confirmation hearings for some of Trump's picks. And they were pretty interesting. I DVR'd them so that in the evening when I got home from work, I could just fast forward through them and see how they went. You know, it's amazing how little show, if you do that little regular show with commercials and stuff, sometimes it's surprising how little show there actually is. But these were really pretty good, and you could kind of tell who you wanted to listen to by who was asking the question. Now, I definitely wanted to listen to what Ted Cruz had to say when he was speaking to Pam Bondi, for instance. I also wanted to hear what Morano from Hawaii had to say to Pam Bondi and to Pete Hegseth, because I knew it would be crazy. And I figured the same thing about Elizabeth Warren and Tammy Duckworth. I thought Tammy Duckworth with Pete Hegseth was, she was completely flown out of the coop and on her way over the woods. I couldn't even exactly get what she was talking about. These guys are so upset. If you look at what's going on, the Republicans are feeling okay, but some of them are a little angry, frankly, at how things have been going, and now they have a chance. And the Democrats are angry in a different way and confused because they keep doing the same thing, and the same thing has pretty much stopped working. They don't know why. And frankly, it takes a while to look around to see why it did stop working. Several things, of course, came together to make that happen. But it's still a fascinating phenomenon. And how fast has things changed? It's breakneck speed, as they say. Now, those of you that remember Ronald Reagan taking over for Jimbo Carter, so I had this problem this week. I think Jimmy Carter, as a person, pretty good guy. I think he meant well. Unfortunately, he didn't do well. I also think that he shoved America really down into a hole. Energy, policy, the whole human rights thing that sounds good on its surface, but it's just not a way that you can conduct real policy. And then, of course, Iran. I mean, think about how long Iran has been a problem. It seems like they're always figuring some other way. The turbines are too tight. That's what I put it down to. They wrap those things too tight, gives them a headache, makes them mad. They don't make good decisions. But anyway, so if you remember then, it was at least a smooth transition of power. Now we keep talking about that smooth transition of power. Well, it kind of makes a difference. Jimmy Carter didn't feel the need to blast Ronald Reagan, talk about him, sideways so that you knew who he was talking about but didn't use his name. He didn't look angry. Didn't look like he was going to fall over either. But then Biden has managed to pull that off, looking both angry and like he might fall over. And all of that. But you remember that to get things done, the push cannot stop. And I've said this before, I don't think it's any secret, that Republicans have a habit of when they do win something, stopping. Right? Well, we won that. Let's go back to the Parcheesi board. No, we can't do it. The Democrats are like rust. They never rest. The liberals just keep pounding away, pounding away, pounding away. And a lot of what's enabled them to do that is they have a lot of money, which is why they're so upset that we see some moneyed people, Musk, Zuckerberg, there's Musk, Zuckerberg, Bezos. I think Sam Altman from OpenAI is going to be sitting up there, and then there's one other guy. And, yeah, they have a lot of money. Seems to very much upset Bernie Sanders, who had to make his money the old-fashioned way. He had to stay in government and try and, figure out some divert funds that direction. It's unclear how he ends up with the 3 houses and all these other kinds of things on his salary, but that's neither here nor there. He is, of course, the champion of the working man. Having never worked himself, he's had plenty of time to observe other people working. Think about going through your life, and Biden's the same way. Think about going through your life as a, quote, public servant, serving in Congress, one form or another. What kind of life lessons are you going to learn? Not only that, but talk about an insular environment. These people think they're so cosmopolitan, and oh, yes, they're not. If you spend some time in D.C., and I have, what you understand is that it's, they call it a bubble out there. Yeah, it's a dome. Things just don't get through it. And whoever's running the dome tries to make sure that no other messages than the ones they want get in or out of it. So these make these people less aware of the world around them than you, probably. They also don't look at other things that they don't like. We are forced to see things we don't like because that's what they've been doing to us. So we have a better grasp of what's out here. And I think that really kind of pays off. This is why right now, when you look at what they're doing, like if you dive into the fever swamps, as I've said, of the left's websites and a few things like that, you really see anger and confusion all at the same time. Before, you just see anger and then a little more anger. When they thought they were in charge, it was just all about pushing it harder and harder. Now they do not understand why some of the things they're doing aren't resonating. You probably know why they're not. They don't seem to be able to figure it out. They're going to figure it out at some point, and, we're going to have a problem with them because they're going to have some kind of unified message. Right now, it's not particularly unified. If you look at what was going on in the confirmation hearings, you got Bernie Sanders up there. It's like the president said, it's an oligarchy because all these rich guys are up here. Well, as was pointed out by Secretary of State nominee, they've never had any trouble with having all those same people, because for Elon maybe, on their side funneling money to them. Remember, Zuckerberg put up, $419 million for the voting assistance that took place in 2020? And it all seemed to go to the side of non-governmental operations and things that favored the Democrats. Yeah, that was okay then. Now it's not so good. They are correct. You want to make sure that your country is not just run, I prefer to think, plutocracy, which is where you just like an oligarchy, but a plutocracy is it's pretty much run by money. We are run by money as a capitalist system, but we're run by the ability for the average man to make money. That's how that works. That's how we're different. Okay, we're back. Thanks for sticking with us here. Rick Wagner getting it right. And I enjoy your listenership. I really do. I was just looking at some of my notes I have here. I have so many of them. And by the way, when we talk about looking into the sort of subterranean, homesick blues of the left out there on the internet in a few places, you can certainly look at it yourself. I have some of these places marked for many years now. It's depressing that I kind of go to see, what's going on. And you can get a tenor of it pretty quickly. It's almost always the same in some senses. It's always attacking, name-calling, and and a lot of pejoratives, what we would call cussing, seems to come up very quickly. As soon as they hit any kind of spot, or any resistance for that matter, the cursing starts coming out. And then, of course, if they're talking to someone who thinks differently than them and who might actually be a conservative, of course, then, of course, the National Socialist branding starts coming out pretty fast. They know nothing about any of the things that they're saying, really, but it's pretty nasty. And they're really going round and round on this. And they've unfortunately got some people convinced out there that things are going to happen that don't even make any sense. I mean, as an outsider, you're like, how would you think of that? The story recently, it was in the Daily Mail, that a lot of LGBTQ plus, more than that, individuals were buying firearms. I'm all in favor of buying firearms. I would like people to buy firearms and give them to me. I'm fine with it. I like firearms. Properly used, maintained, and safety procedures taking place, firearms are extremely useful. I've used them for a long time for three different things, and never been sorry. However, they appear to be buying them because they have been led to believe that under the Trump administration, he's going to be rounding up people of that stripe and sending them to some kind of camps. Now, I have not heard one bit of that from anybody even close to an administration official or would-be administration official, much less a candidate. Think about that. This shows you how little they're actually listening to the primary source. It's a good lesson for us, too. There's no way they could have been spending any quality time listening to President Trump and some of his other people and come up with that kind of theory. What they are is they're just listening to people telling them what he had said, or people around him has said. And you would think that with all this access to information, that people would be able to understand things. This was the whole idea, right, of all of this internet and everything, is people had all this access to information and they could, make up their own minds about things, and that's still a good theory and happens if you want it to. But many people only look at one thing, and they only listen to what someone tells them.
Entering service.
Oh, jeez. That'll teach me. My watch went off. That they only will identify with that. And because they only identify with that, they aren't interested in anything else because they believe, these guys know what they're talking about. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I mean, I have people I trust in the news, pretty regularly. But I still look at other sites and I try and, if it's an important point, I try and make sure that we're at least in the right direction. Is there going to be hyperbole? Sure. Are people constantly outraged sometimes because it makes good television? Yeah. I mean, I watch the Fox News, and there's a couple of commentators on there that are like, oh, yeah, here we go. They have a lot. They're talking a lot, but they don't really have a lot to say. I mean, nothing that you already don't know. An opinion about it that I would soon have you on there as a regular person talking about it, even though they're just saying something that's, I think, fundamentally clear, and they're acting like it's big news. And when you get the real people on there that knows things, such as, Douglas Murray, I go through my list. John Turley is another one who I really like, too, for their legal commentary. He's a nice, mild-mannered guy who is clearly sort of in a semi-state of shock over some of this lawfare stuff. He actually believes in the justice system, and poor guy, I think it's damaging to him in the long run. And of course, VDH, Victor Davis Hanson, has he's really analyzed this to the point where it's become humorous. After the speech of, if I call it a speech, by Obama, they had, I think VDH was on one of the Fox shows, and he was actually laughing. Now, he's a serious guy. I'm not suggesting he's a glum guy, but he's a pretty serious guy. So for you to be saying things that are so outrageous in that context that it makes him kind of laugh, that's pretty interesting. That's showing that something's really going on there that is just unhinged. But if you want to get a taste of what the other side is like and how they view things without having to go down and really get in the nitty-gritty some of these places, and I don't recommend it, particularly if you don't like a lot of cursing and a few things like that. I usually take a couple of Excedrin before I do it. And on some days, if I do it after the Excedrin and I've done it, it's this small shot of whiskey. It seems to help. But you can go to, like, Yahoo News. I mentioned them before. Yahoo, is on the Internet. They used to be a big thing, a search engine and so forth. Now they're not so much a search engine. They just have some sites, and they sell domain names and stuff. And, so they're still relatively big out there. But they are called, what am I going to say here? They're simpletons. But they have a news service that is really very similar to MSNBC. They just talk about more things, a little more finance in there, and a little more of this, that. And listening to reading the take they have on various topics, and the interjection from the second they start talking about it of opinion into this supposedly news article, it's really revealing. I don't like a lot of opinion in there. I don't want somebody to say they'll largely discredit it or there's made this without any evidence. That's not the way to do it. That's all over the left. He said without any evidence. I don't think that's true. Maybe there is evidence. And is it your place really to decide in this article? So I don't like that kind of stuff. I don't like it on the right, and it's on the left most of the time. But if you read Yahoo News and get a couple of those, you'll get a sense of it almost right away. That there is a lens that they look through at conservatives. And an even darker one they look at, like conservative Christians and folks like that, where everything is a problem. Everything stems from some unimaginably bleak emotional movement on the part of the person doing it. Conservatives cannot do anything in their eyes altruistically to help anybody. Their view is that they spend all of their time trying to figure out ways to, now the thing is, to, crush democracy. Well, I guess that's easy to say when you apparently don't really understand what democracy is, which they don't seem to understand what that means. What they think democracy means, if you read enough of it, this is just a theory of mine, it's mob rule controlled by a few demagogues. That's kind of what happens with their version of democracy. I don't know if they describe it that way, but if they were turned loose, that's what it would be. They would have a few people who demagogued the audience out there, and everybody voted on everything, and you raised your hand, and if it was 51%, that's what happened. And everybody else be darned. And their ability to have some say, it's not important. You see that with the Electoral College. Anybody who really has more of an IQ above, I don't know, that of a hot light bulb. That's probably too odd. Let's say the light bulb in your refrigerator. Anybody with one above that can see that the idea of the Electoral College was to balance out the states so that part of the country didn't just get left behind in the decision-making process. Because what happens is the people that have the power inevitably start using it in a way to disadvantage the people that don't have the electoral power. And that leads to a number of things. It can lead to them breaking off. It can lead to civil war. I mean, it isn't just because you're trying to be fair, such as it is. You're trying to address what we know to be common human reactions to being constantly minimized. Electoral College addresses that. So does the Senate. I mean, come on. You have 2 senators from California. You have 2 senators from Delaware. I mean, are they representing the same amount of people? No. But they didn't used to be representing people, remember? They were representing the legislatures. And we don't do that anymore. So now we just elect them, and they're essentially 6-year congressmen as opposed to 2-year congressmen. Bad idea. When you see that, you understand their view of democracy, their view of how things should go, is just a helter-skelter. Everybody votes on their phone after listening to some wild demagoguery on the left and make sure that anybody on the right is not allowed to speak. That's kind of what it is. Not very attractive. Oh, all right, we're back. I'd listen to a little bit more of that song, partly because, it's the Battle of New Orleans. They're singing there, but Colonel Jackson is, of course, Andrew Jackson, who would later go on to be President of the United States, and a big favorite in many ways of President Donald J. Trump. For some good reasons. He was a tough, no-nonsense guy. And got things done, too. I thought this segment, I wanted to spend some more time on something we've talked about before. And it's not something we've talked about enough, I think. As this media stuff keeps going on. Now, I know we got the inauguration and everything going on, and I'm very excited for it. But we had this hostage deal, and once again, the Middle East, what we think of as the Middle East anyway, it really isn't in the middle. People used to think of the Middle East more like around Egypt, Suez, and, that it was sort of in the middle there. But now we just call it the Middle East. And if you try and sort out what's going on and understand the dynamics of which are not calmed down yet. Remember, there was a lot of upheaval here for a long time, like from the First World War. And that starts off with what we talked about was that during the First World War, 1914, 1918, the Ottoman Empire, which had been around quite some time now, several hundred years, it had, lost a lot of its luster and some of its shine, but it still controlled a lot along the areas we do think of the Middle East and all the way through Iran, Iraq, down from Turkey, and ending up in these areas. They had the places that we sort of think of as Palestine, which is, by the way, a region, not a people, and so forth. So the people they allied with were the Germans, yes, and the good old Austro-Hungarian Empire, which, like the Ottoman Empire, was not really in its full bloom of youth or even preparedness. But they were pretty determined to hang on to these areas. So, eventually, of course, you would expect, with all of this fighting going on, there was the Arab Revolt. There's an Arab Revolt by, Sharif Hassan of Mecca. And this is where he was supported by British, notably T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. That's where you see in the movie, which is a tremendous movie. We just don't make movies like that anymore. Now, they rebelled against this Ottoman rule because they wanted independence. Now, it was a little hard because, and if you watch that movie, actually, it's very true, is that even towards the end, when they're fighting to get their independence, they are only inches away from disliking each other more than they dislike the British or the French or whoever they're trying to get independence from at the time, or the Ottomans. And so it makes it very difficult. They have a very raucous time trying to decide who's going to do what, how's this going to run, who gets what's the spheres of influence, right? Well, so the Allies, who are really still in charge there because they're there, they have military presence, and some of these areas were colonies or remnants of colonies. So the British and the French decide to divide the Ottoman Empire into spheres of influence. Okay? And Britain decides that as part of that, they need to establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. That's called the Balfour Doctrine, Balfour. Now that's in 1917. So that happens. The war ends. Then what goes on? Well, there's a peace conference in Paris. The Ottoman territories are divided under the League of Nations mandates. Remember Woodrow Wilson, League of Nations, which was ineffective and really was just I don't know. It's like going to the neighborhood bar with a bunch of people who disagreed. And then it grew, luckily, into the more corrupt and also ineffective United Nations. But anyway, so they supposedly got these things through the League of Nations under mandates. Interesting enough, they were pretty much exactly what the great powers wanted, but that's what happened. So Britain came away with the area of Palestine, the Transjordan area, and Iraq. France came up with Syria and Lebanon. Now remember, a couple of these countries are not really countries. They were really formed at this time by the British and the French. The Kingdom of Iraq was established in 1921. Faisal I becomes king under British supervision, and they were granted independence in 1932. In Syria, the Syrians were unhappy with French rule, and they had an uprising in, I'm thinking, like 1925, and revolted against the French. And the French just said, this is too much trouble. And so that was the end of that. And so Syria went off on its own, as it were. And during this time, they had what was called the rise of Zionism and Arab nationalism. Increased Jewish immigrants coming to Palestine under the British mandate, which was to say we need to give them a homeland, and a traditional homeland, where you may have noticed that if you read the Bible, this area has got a lot of Christians and Jews in it, right? So this was the area that they thought would be good to return to. It's not stolen. They're just integrating back to a place they've been for a very long time. And so with that mandate in Syria and this rise of Zionism, all this nationalism, the Arabs also become very nationalistic, considering that a lot of them were just really tribal groups. Bedouin culture is not really suited towards a fixed situation. They have a lot to do with caravans. They move a lot. It's a very interesting culture. And there was, of course, people that dwelt along the sea, especially in Lebanon, and did all the trading and so forth. So, your Bedouin Arabs were sort of like your free-range grazers, cowboys out there. They moved around. They had their own groups, and one of the things they had were their own wells. Now, many of you know that the Sahara is not as dry as it seems. It's super dry, but it has a fair amount of water under its surface, its immediate surface. There's a couple reasons for that. Some of it is, some osmosis from areas far away that have water in it that comes through the structure. And also because the Sahara Desert has not always been a desert. About, I'm going to say 40,000 years ago, I can be corrected. That area during the African humid period was pretty lush. And I think we mentioned it last week. It was a relatively lush area. Now, it wasn't like we think of the interior Africa around the Congo or something, but it was more like we see in the veldt. You see rolling hills, grass, rivers, trees, and flora and fauna, like you couldn't imagine now if you were standing out there. And because of that, there was obviously a great deal of rain to support that. That period of time where there was so much more rain in that area factors into another one of these kind of confusing and interesting situations that are out there in archaeology. That is the age of the Sphinx. Now, many of you know the Sphinx has not always stood there just like that. When Napoleon came to Egypt, the Sphinx was almost completely buried in sand. because that's what happens to things in the Sahara, because the wind and the sand and it moves around and things just disappear. So it had to be excavated over time. So they excavated it out. They didn't know how long it had been under the sand. It could have been very little time for all you could tell because the sand moves so much, at least geological time. And so they got down to it, and the base of it seemed to be weathered differently than the rest of it. And they decided, based on their observations, that it was about 4,000 to 5,000 years old. Old enough, yes, sir. But they couldn't quite figure out what it was for. There's been a lot of, the riddle of the Sphinx is something here all the time. And in the latter part of the 20th century and the first parts of the 21st century, some geologists have went there and looked around at the base of the Sphinx and dug out a little bit more and find what they believe is to be water erosion. Now, if it was built 4 or 5 years ago, very little water erosion would have taken place. If it was built a long time ago, especially if there was more humidity, more free-flowing waters, a different climate essentially, then you would have water erosion. That, of course, sends the classically trained archaeologists into a fit because they have these years of study and theories about everything that is sort of based around this age. But it was an interesting portion I saw. One of a geologist interviewed who seemed pretty solid grounded. He was on Joe Rogan, I think, just 6 months ago. And one of the things I thought that was funny was he believes that it's water erosion, and it shows that the Sphinx could be quite a bit older than we think it is. So he took some photographs of the water erosion around the base of the Sphinx. And then he sent them off to colleagues and folks in other areas that were geologists such as he, hydrogeologists, and they asked him, what do you think they are? And they all said, well, those look like water erosion to me. Then he told them, well, I took these pictures off the Sphinx. And they all started backtracking. Well, I don't know. It could be a lot of things. I don't know. Or my mom's calling me. I'm late for lunch. I got to go home. That sort of thing happened to him because they didn't want to get into a back and forth about history with a settled science, as it were. We know how well that settled science works. So that period in African history was very interesting. And as it all began to dry up because I think because there were too many diesel trucks on the road, is my guess, probably even some, not enough electric trucks, not enough electric camels. No, electric camel, you hardly ever saw one, as I understand it. So it began to dry up, and as it did so, the peoples that were living around there became more and more distant from each other because they had to travel over these relatively inhospitable lands to other places to get their trade routes. That's what was going on. And it was still going on that way during, the period between 1919 and 1939. After they'd sort of divvied everything up, and Faisal became king under the British supervision and independence at Iraq, and us, by the way, and the French mandate in Syria, as I said, did not go particularly well. They had some uprisings, had what's called the Great Syrian Revolt between 1925 and 1927. Then there was this increasing arrival and tension of usually European Jews. There were some Jews there in what we think of as Israel now, but they really came in great numbers from Europe and other places where they'd been so oppressed. And they finally had a home of their own. Again, let's not forget that at one point, you can read your Bible, which is, these areas is still not bad history. And you can see that this is not an area that they just plucked out of nowhere for the Israelis. But these people showing up did not make your Syrian nationalists very happy. And so you begin to have a lot of tension. In 1936, the British recognized Egypt's independence from them and anybody else, but they still retained control over the Suez Canal. Now, I know that's going to be a problem here down the road, but the Suez Canal is a canal like the Panama Canal that was built to just make a tremendously shorter trip of something. And if you look at where the Suez Canal between Egypt there and the Isthmus of Hormuz, you see it's a thin strip of land. I mean, it's not like 20 feet, and it's also much smaller than Panama. And everybody kept thinking as time went by, if we could just dig a channel through that, we could go out through the Red Sea and go to India and China so much faster. To say nothing about the other side of Africa that would be so much easier to reach. And Madagascar and all of these places. It would be not a time saver, a money saver, the whole deal. So they wanted that area. They tried to keep it, I think it's 56, I'll have to look that up here. That, of course, there became a problem with it, right? Because Egypt's independent and they think they should run the canal. And, of course, that's the Suez Canal, the Suez Crisis that happens a few years later. Also, with the Suez there, as you might guess, that's a strategic choke point for energy and all sorts of things coming out of the Mediterranean. So it's extremely important, not just for trade, but for tactically. The British had a lot of influence in Iraq and Iran. They were part of the invasion of Iran, in 1941. Once again, they were on those characters were on the side of the axis. It's kind of the way they roll, I think. So the Allies went in and occupied Iran, mainly the Soviets and the British, to secure oil and supply rights to the Soviet Union at that time. Because you may recall, the Soviet Union wasn't able to really get its own natural resources because it was fighting the longest front in in world history along the Eastern Front. So they secured that, which was an understandable tactical move. So there was a coup in Iraq in 1941, and they tried to put some different people on the throne and a few things like that. It was just very tumultuous. European Jews are still coming, seeking refuge in Palestine, the area of Palestine. I always hate it when they just call it that. It's an area, not a country or even a province per se. Sort of a province, I guess. And we're getting more and more Jewish-Arab tensions. And Arab nations continue to support the Allies, thinking they're going to get something out of it. They have some resentment over unfulfilled promises of independence and so forth, but they think that'll eventually come. And they do need some investment and some guidance here after being really held down for so long by the Ottoman Empire. So by the time end of World War II rolls around in 1945, they decide to create their own league, like the League of Nations. They're still part of the League of Nations, many of them, but they decide the creation of the Arab League in 1945, and that has, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. And the purpose of that was to promote Arab unity, which was hard to do, believe me, and counter Zionist ambitions. In other words, creation of the State of Israel and it existing in a way that bothered them because it was becoming much more westernized and wealthy and successful. They didn't like that either. And so they decided that they needed to oppose that. And after the war, then, you had all kinds of demands for independence and self-determination across the region. There was also a lot of this anti-colonial sentiment, which you probably know started taking place about this time, and places that still had colonies began to give them up or change the way that they were interacted with them, things like that. And from that point, as you see, there's nothing settled. If you get something out of it, nothing is ever really settled. There's people that come in and create countries, have spheres of influence, this and that. They knock the Ottomans out, and now they're in there running around trying to decide what's in their best interest. By I mean that the European powers. And so it's constantly either a revolt from someone like the Syrians, it's not going very well there, or what were the Allied powers, like the British, for instance, were arming one group of people against another group of people. We see that all the time. And so the place never was, from that time forward. Let's face it, the whole area in there has been having some sort of problem, for forever, of course, but certainly since the Crusades. And so it's just a hotbed of problematic sects, different nationalities, as well as religious problems. So anybody thinks they're just going to stroll in there and, straighten these guys out, maybe with over a couple of, if this would be Biden, of course, it would be a Frappuccino, perhaps. It's just not going to happen. Not that way. The Arabs continue to feel like they have been promised things from the West that they never got. They also say, you promised us things, we never got them, and in the meantime, you create another country over here and bring in all sorts of people from Europe. They sort of see it as a proto-colonial kind of thing. The rest of the world, for the most part, thinks it is a return to the homeland. And frankly, after Europe had so complicit in so many different places about the extermination of the Jews, I don't think he wanted to trust places to live there much anymore. I mean, it wasn't just the Nazis here that were doing it. There are a lot of people in some of these nations that when the Germans came in were more than happy to cooperate with them, help find these people. So the prevailing feeling among the Jewish community was that this is a bad place. It's a bad place for us off and on since, Nero. And we need to have just our own one place. We can't go back to Jerusalem. They'd like to. Jerusalem is now held by another country. And we have had the rise of this very important Islam. And so they're antithetical in many ways to the Jews. And so they can't just return to that, although for many times they had an agreement where Jews and Christians could visit Jerusalem and not be bothered. And that happens once in a while, and it stops happening, and so forth. So there's nothing there but tension, if I get anything across at all. Nothing's ever been really settled. People haven't all agreed to anything. Some people have agreed to some things, others have agreed to another. So you just have a very volatile situation because there's so many different ways people can pop off. And during these times, the attacks, especially by the, to be fair, by the Arab countries have been pretty intense. And Israel has managed to fight them off each time, sometimes even gaining land. And the other side doesn't like that, makes them look bad. So everybody's just waiting for something. And it's very hard to keep it tapped down. We will be back next week.
Folks, thanks for listening.
Take care of yourself.
Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickWagnerShow.com. Both of them will take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.